On October 10th, the Biden administration released its new national security strategy. Although it is rare to release the strategy almost 2 years into a presidential term, the Russo-Ukrainian War, or the Russia invasion of Ukraine, delayed the release. And the strategy, the administration tries to balance need to compete with Russia in the short term, China over the long term, while still cooperating on global problems such as avoiding climate change and preventing the spread of global diseases. Which leads us in today's question, which is what grade does Biden deserve for his recently released 2022 national security strategy? Well, I say B minus, and I'll tell you why. We'll evaluate one, the distinctiveness, two, the defined goals, and three, the realistic implementation guidelines. Now let's break this down. Distinctiveness. Although this national security strategy is similar to the last administration and recognizing the permanent threat of strategic competition with China, the strategy differs in its strong emphasis on transnational challenges such as climate change, food security, and pandemic disease. The danger is presenting this later grouping as one of two overall changes. However, that is a very large category under which many issues could reasonably fall, making it harder to distinguish priority areas. Nevertheless, this difference is a notable change from the 2017 national security strategy and activates the Biden's team's general focus. Furthermore, the Biden team rightly identifies China as the most consequential geopolitical threat facing the United States and its partners. But at the same time, it cites climate change as the greatest of all shared threats facing the world. The underlying problem here is that at times, the Biden administration appears to sacrifice the former in favor of the later. In implementing the strategy, the Biden team must ensure that efforts to counter China are not forgotten, even efforts to address climate change. Then I'll move on to my second point, which is defining goals. The overarching goal is stated clearly. We want a free, open, proportionate, and secure international border, but it is aspirational and under-specified, not actionable, and cannot be measured, which was mentioned in the national security. The NSS specifies three sub-coordinate goals: A, outcompete rivals, B, mobilize allies, and C, shape the rules of the road. The sub-coordinate goals, especially the first two, are closer to being specific and actionable. The goals do a reasonable job mapping onto the strategic context identified above. To meet the challenge of the great power competition, the United States must outcompete rivals. To meet the challenge of the transitional threats, the United States shapes the rules of the road, and the United States mobilizes allies to do both. The one thing I find lacking in anything that maps onto the rhetoric about the global democracy, while the NSS recognizes the importance of ideological aspects of great power competition, it pays inefficient attention to the tools and opportunities and possibilities for strengthening and championing democracy abroad. Which leads me into my third point, realistic implementation guidelines. The strategy identifies three lines of effort. A, invest in sources of American strength. B, invest in coalitions and allies. And C, invest in the U.S. military. The first is an echo of Obama's provisional national building a home. The second is a boilerplate liberal internationalism. Both contain laundry list. The third is also standard for the NSS document, but it is also interesting to note what this administration chose to emphasize: nuclear modernization, deterrence, and conventional war capabilities, coupled with a almost total neglect of counterterrorism, counterinsurgency, peace building, or state failure. This strikes me as a classical example of overcorrecting, letting the pendulum swing too far in response to currently fashionable and intellectual trends. The NSS goes out of its way to state, by my count, 4 separate times that the U.S. military would not try to change regimes or remake societies. A striking indication of how much the administration thinking about defense policy is governed by recency bias and rebutting straw men. The only discussion of terrorism is under shared challenges, not under defense policy, suggesting that the administration sees little role for the military in fighting terrorism. Yes, these lines of effort will support the goals outlined above, except shared challenge of terrorism, for which the NSS provides woefully inadequate thought or planning. Like every NSS, this is not truly a strategy document because it mostly a discussion of ends with some consideration of ways and almost no consideration of means. As such, there's not much guidance in this document about implementation. The NSS is feasible, but not really succeed. Would almost certainly cost much more than any other administration would to emit in this political environment. To compete with great powers while reviving the democratic world order and tackling a long list of shared challenges is a tall order, the cost of which the American people seem unable to understand, and the Biden administration seems unwilling to admit it. So, what grade does Biden deserve for his recently released 2022 National Security Strategy? Well, I think it's B because, again, of these lack of distinctiveness, if I say, and the lack of defined goals that are seemingly unachievable to a couple of them, and 3, the realistic implementation guidelines, which seem also far-reaching and unable to achieve in some ways, as mentioned. Thank you.